Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something pretty wild. We're going to see how an ancient legal argument about a simple rule for sacrifices completely spirals into a massive debate about whether the Great Flood even happened. Yeah, you heard that right. Let's get into it.
So, how on earth do you get from a sacrifice to the Great Flood? Well, to even begin to understand that, we have to start with the one single rule that you absolutely could not break. The one rule at the very heart of the entire sacrificial system. And the Torah is super clear about this. It says, look, sacrifices have to be brought to one place, and only one place. At first, this was the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary in the desert. And then later, it was the big one, the temple in Jerusalem. This first right here, from Leviticus, this is what lays down the law. If you offered a perfectly good sacrifice anywhere else, that was a huge deal. I mean, a really severe transgression. It was punishable by this heavy-duty penalty called karet, which is basically a kind of spiritual cutoff. But you knew there was a but, right? Like any good legal system, this seemingly absolute rule, it has a loophole. And this loophole is crucial. It hinges on just one key idea, and honestly, it's the engine that drives this entire wild debate. Okay, real quick, just so we're all on the same page. The text we're looking at has two main parts. You've got the Mishnah, that's the core law, kind of like the statute, and then you have the Gemara, which is this huge, sprawling conversation that analyzes and debates that law. They're both part of the Talmud. All right, got it? Good. Now let's look at that loophole. So here's the principle. The Mishnah says that this whole rule about not sacrificing outside the temple, it only counts for animals that were fit to be sacrificed inside the temple to begin with. You follow? If an animal was considered unfit for the main altar, well, then the rule about location just doesn't apply. Which, of course, leads to the big question, what exactly makes an animal unfit? And wow, this list of what makes an animal unfit is really something. I mean, you've got some practical ones, right? Like the red heifer, which had to be handled outside the temple anyway, or the scapegoat, which was literally sent out into the wilderness. But then you get into these really deep moral categories. An animal that was used as payment to a prostitute or one that had been worshipped as an idol? Nope. Those were seen as tainted, totally unfit for a sacred offering. So if you sacrificed those animals somewhere else, no penalty. Okay, so just when you think you've got it figured out, there's another twist. That one sacred place we've been talking about, well, it wasn't always in the same place. The location and even the rules about it actually changed throughout history. Yeah, just look at this timeline. It really shows how things shifted. So before the tabernacle was built, private altars, totally fine. But once the tabernacle was up and running, nope, forbidden. But then it gets complicated. As the Israelites moved around and went through different periods, the rule kind of toggled on and off. Sometimes private altars were allowed, sometimes they were banned again. This went on until the temple was finally built in Jerusalem. And that's when the rule became permanent, one place, no exceptions. All right, so with all that background, now we can finally get to the real heart of it. The Gemara, remember, that's the commentary part. It zooms in on one tiny, super specific case from the Mishnah. And by picking it apart, it ends up exposing a question that is way bigger than anyone expected. You remember the red heifer from that list of unfit animals? The Mishnah says you're off the hook if you burn it outside its pit. Seems pretty straightforward, right? But the Gemara, it slams on the brakes right there. It stops and asks this incredibly sharp question. Wait a minute, what exactly do you mean by its pit? And this is where we get a classic Talmudic showdown. Two of the greatest sages, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, give completely different answers. Reish Lakish takes the phrase literally. He says the pit is a real physical ditch that's been specially inspected to make sure there are no hidden graves under it, because that would make the whole area ritually impure. But Rabbi Yochanan, he says no way. It's just a metaphor, a figure of speech. It just means outside its proper place, which for the red heifer was the Mount of Olives, not inside Jerusalem. And Rabbi Yochanan immediately comes back with what feels like a knockout punch. He challenges Reish Lakish, saying, why on earth would you need to inspect one special little pit? We have a tradition that the entire land of Israel is already considered ritually pure. And that's a huge problem for Reish Lakish's argument. I mean, how could two of the top scholars disagree on something so basic about the land itself? And this is the moment. This is where a tiny legalistic argument about a ditch just explodes. It blows up into a debate about one of the most famous stories ever told. Because the answer to that question, Is the land pure or not? It all comes down to what you believe about the Great Flood.
Yeah, it really all boils down to this one question. Did Noah's flood actually happen in the land of Israel? Their whole argument about the pit, about the purity of the land, it all hinges on that one point. Because if the flood did happen there, well, you'd have undiscovered graves everywhere from that catastrophe. That's the key.
And this is the incredible part. Both of them, Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, base their entire argument on the exact same verse from the prophet Ezekiel. Rish Lakish reads it as a simple statement. You are a land that is not cleansed. Rain fell on you. Meaning the flood did happen. The land is impure with old graves, so you do need to inspect a special pit. But Rabbi Yochanan reads the very same words as a rhetorical question. Are you not a cleansed land? Did rain really fall on you? And for him, the implied answer is no. So the flood didn't happen there, the whole land is pure, and the pit is just a metaphor. It's an amazing example of how one verse can be read in two completely opposite ways.
Okay, so let's just take a breath and step back for a second. Why does any of this matter? I mean, what's the big takeaway from an argument that starts with a misplaced cow and somehow ends up debating the Great Flood? Well, what we've just seen is a perfect masterclass in how the Talmud thinks. It's a method. You start with a clear rule, then you immediately start poking at the exceptions, the edge cases. You scrutinize every single word. I mean, who argues about the meaning of the word pit? They do. And that intense focus forces you to uncover your hidden assumptions, the stuff you take for granted. In this case, assumptions about world history. And then you test those assumptions against other texts. It's just this relentless, brilliant process of digging deeper and deeper. And what this whole journey really shows us is that the goal of this kind of thinking, it isn't always about finding one single final answer. It's about revealing that just beneath the surface of every rule, every law, every story, there are these huge, profound assumptions just sitting there, waiting for someone to question them. And it kind of leaves you thinking, sometimes the questions we learn how to ask are so much more important than the answers we end up finding.